So good morning, everybody, and welcome to Hi Vadivel. Welcome to the PUP December webinar, where Catherine Déri is going to be talking about AI and how faculty and students react to it. Just to introduce Catherine a little bit, Catherine is a professor here at the university, is an associate professor here at the Université du Québec en Outaouais. She is also a postdoc fellow with the Partnership on University Plagiarism Prevention. And today she will be talking about a PUP data collection that was done and an article that will be published very soon in the
The
book.
book chapter.
Thank you. It's a book
Yeah.
chapter published under the editorship of Alison King. So, Catherine, up to you.
Okay. Merci beaucoup, Martine. Can you see my screen share? Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Good day, everyone. I'm really happy to be with you this morning or this afternoon for those who are joining us from Europe. The presentation is going to be in English, but I do see some French names. Donc, si jamais il y a des francophones dans le groupe, la présentation va être en anglais, mais vous pouvez poser vos questions en français. Là, j'ai aucun problème avec ça. Puis, au pire, là, je pourrais traduire pour les autres. So, as Martin mentioned, what I'm presenting this morning are findings from two data collections of the Partnership on University Plagiarism Prevention. And we're going to be looking at those data from the perspective of university professors, or maybe you call them faculty or staff at your institutions, and how they adjusted or adapted to artificial intelligence in the 6, 12, and 18 months following the launch of ChatGPT. So I'm going to be following a little bit of a scientific research structure, but I'll diverge a little bit from it as well. But I will lay the ground with the problem statement, and then I'll show you the framework that we used for the book chapter that has been written by Martin and myself. And then I'll talk to you about the Partnership on University Plagiarism Prevention. I know some of you are part of the partnership, but for others, it may be new to you. And then I'll present data from two different data collections, like I said, and then we'll look at next steps and what we have on the books for the next few years. So when we talk about academic integrity and plagiarism, it's always important to kind of situate where the presenter is at with all of that. So even with the rapid evolution of generative AI, I don't consider that the definition or the values of academic integrity have changed. So for me, they still remain the same as what you see on the screen here. With academic integrity, basically being that you adhere to the values that were published by the International Center for Academic Integrity in 2021. That was the second iteration of those values, in which the courage value, the last one, number 6, was added, which is very interesting because we're talking about the courage of having your own ideas and putting them on paper on the screen as a student, but also having the courage of reporting a peer. So we can see that in team assignments where it's more difficult for students sometimes to report when there's a member of the team that has plagiarized. So academic integrity, the definitions and the values have not changed. However, the definition of plagiarism has changed in the age of generative AI. So on the left of the screen, you see what the definition was in the past. And we were looking at the use of someone else's ideas to pass them as your own. And there's definitely some studies that showed that plagiarism has been on the rise since the COVID-19 pandemic. And the reasons for plagiarism haven't really changed in the last few decades. Mainly lack of time with students always waiting for the last minute to submit their assignments. If they're pressed for time, sometimes they will cut corners and plagiarize. But there's also pressure from parents and peers. And there's lack of knowledge and skills, which would be considered as unintentional plagiarism. And the consequences of plagiarism are an unfair advantage, missed learning opportunities, and also a degraded value of diplomas or certificates. But there's also interesting studies that reveal that students who plagiarize during their studies and don't necessarily get caught will tend to reproduce those misbehaviors or misconduct in their professional and also personal lives in the future. Um, and now the new definition in the age of generative AI for plagiarism. This one was coined by Martin Peters in a publication that just came out in early 2023. So it's when we're looking at the words of or the ideas of another person, but also those that have been generated by artificial intelligence without referring or declaring the use of GenAI in the case that we're interested. So that raises the question about authorship when we think about generative AI. And there's still a debate that is on about authorship to see if chatbots can be considered as authors or co-authors. But fairly early on, after the launch of ChatGPT, there's a couple of important scientific bodies that took position on this. The first one was Nature, which is a scientific journal, and you see the screen capture on the slide here that decided that tools such as ChatGPT or any other chatbots are not considered as authors or co-authors, and any of the manuscripts that are submitted for publication through this scientific journal should not or must not use chatbots as authors or co-authors. And then shortly after that, there's the Committee on Publication Ethics Council that also established that machines are not currently recognized as authors because generative AI tools cannot take authorial responsibility for the text that has been generated. So when you look at the copyrights laws, they only apply to human beings. They don't apply to machines. We can't really bring a machine to court for copyright breaches. So hence, that's why, based on the definition or legal definitions of copyrights, chatbots are not considered authors. However, they have been used quite a lot over the past 2 years, mainly by students, and some of the faculty staff or professors are still a little bit behind. So what you see on the screen is a graph from a study that was done 1 year after the launch of ChatGPT in the United States. And as you can see, 1 year after ChatGPT was launched, there were 50% of the students at university in this study that were using the tool, and only 22% of faculty that were using it. And you've got the numbers here. They may be a bit small for you, but we're looking at 1,600 students and 1,000 faculty. So those are quite significant numbers here to represent what was happening at that time. So based on the data collections that we've done over the past 2 years with our partnership, we have seen this curve kind of move towards the right with students aiming or reaching almost 100% usage or at least trials, and the faculty still being a bit behind, and I'll talk about the reasons why in a few minutes here. So why are students using AI more than faculty? That's what I'll be responding to before the end of the presentation. But for both groups, it's important for them to know that artificial intelligence is not necessarily about to replace human intelligence, even though there's worries about that. There's some definite strengths on both sides. And by combining both intelligences, we can certainly benefit from the joint venture. So if we look at human intelligence, there's three things that I feel like are strengths on that side that are interested from an educative perspective. So the first one is creativity. So that's definitely a human intelligence strength. It's not because machines cannot be creative, but when they are, they have been programmed to create, so their creativity is more linear and structured, whereas humans will create based on a more erratic um, pattern, if you wish. So that means that sometimes there will be trials and errors, and then you stumble upon a creation that is quite unique and original, whereas artificial intelligence cannot necessarily reach that end state. The other thing that human intelligence is more strong than artificial intelligence is to make decisions. And again, artificial intelligence can still make decisions, but humans are good at making decisions with lack of information or in a situation where there's an urgency or when they're facing an ethical dilemma where both options that are in front of them will result in negative consequences. So they have to weigh the best and the worst of the negative consequences. And the last one is humor. So the human beings are able to adapt to their audience, especially read nonverbal cues to adjust their sense of humor to their audience, whereas artificial intelligence can certainly tell you jokes, but they are unable to adapt or adjust as well as human beings. And then on the artificial intelligence side, obviously there's lots of strengths in relation to the volume of data that can be managed, the networking that can be done between different machines, and then also the transferability of learning at the end of the life cycle. We have yet to be able to transfer what's in someone's brain into someone else's brain when they pass, but who knows, maybe that's going to happen in the future. So when we think about those strengths on both sides, there is an adjustment to the Bloom's taxonomy that was done by the Oregon State University that I find quite interesting. That is giving options to professors, staff, or faculty on what to do with some of their assignments or learning activities that they're developing for their students, and when they should be strictly using or aiming at using human skills, and when it's recommended to supplement the learning with GenAI. So if you think of creativity, which I just talked to you about, which is at the top here. So human skills, were definitely wanting to engage both the creativity and the cognitive process for humans that are learning. But we can use artificial intelligence for brainstorming processes, for example. But the creation at the end remains a human creation. So for those who are not necessarily familiar with this taxonomy, the more you go up in the levels of the taxonomy, the more complex the task becomes. So at the bottom, it's remembering. So it's calling upon your memory to remember things. And obviously, as humans, we have started using machines a lot more to remember things for us. If we know that we have access to Google, for example, and able to find information quickly, we will not necessarily remember those details. But we got to be careful, because what if technology is not available? And what if our memory becomes a bit more lazy? by always giving those tasks to machines. And when we talk about giving tasks to machines, that's called cognitive offloading. So nowadays, human beings always have to ask themselves three different questions when they're facing a task. So the first question is, should I be doing the task without using digital tools? Should I be using digital tools to help me do the task? And the third question is, should I have digital tools do the task on my behalf? And that's called cognitive offloading when you start delegating cognitive tasks to a machine. And when you're asking yourself those questions, if you're teaching, you should also ask yourself those questions when you're developing learning activities or evaluations for your students. So should your student be doing the task without using digital tools? Should your students be using digital tools to help them do the task? Or should students have digital tools do the task on their behalf? So for our article or our book chapter that Martin and I wrote, we use a theoretical framework from Rabi, and this framework explains to you how to adjust to new technologies. And technologies here is pretty broad, but obviously for the purpose of this webinar, we'll be talking about generative AI as the new technology. So the first stage of the theoretical framework is called awareness. And for awareness, the instructors are indirectly exposed to the new technology, either in a professional or personal setting. So for example, the instructors could be aware or exchanging with colleagues, with friends or family members who are already using the new technology out of curiosity to try to find out more information about it. They can also attend webinars like the one today or training sessions that are provided by their institutions. Then when you become more curious about the new technology and or you're obligated to start using it by your establishment, then you can look at trialing the technology in relation to your personal usage. So personal usage would be things that you do at home. So communicating with your loved ones or your friends, and then trying to understand a bit more the technology. In the case of generative AI, it would be generating digital products like documents, audios, or videos, or searching for information. And that would be really strictly for your personal use. The third stage would be to start using the technology for your professional usage. So in the case of university professors or faculty, we're talking about the responsibilities that are separate from teaching. So we're talking about administrative or research responsibilities. And in this case, professional usage of generative AI could be to translate things, to write emails, to draft funding requests, things like that. And then finally, the last stage is the full integration of generative AI in our case for pedagogical use. And that's when instructor will develop their courses, they will develop learning activities, they will teach the students how to use the new technology, they will use it for evaluations and even to provide feedback. So we're looking at the whole integration really for teaching and learning. So what's interesting about this framework is that it was developed for primary school teachers, but we felt that it could certainly apply to university levels and generative AI adjustment. Also, there are some instructors that may go through these steps in sequence, but others may jump directly to stage 4, for example. And that was my case actually when ChatGPT came out in November 2022. I right away I started using it with my students in my classes. I asked them if they wanted to trial some tools with me. And then in January, I already reviewed some of my learning activities and evaluations to integrate generative AI. So I kind of jumped over to number 4 right away, while still trying to do some of the previous stages. And you can also make it to a stage and then you're not happy with the results and then revert back to a previous stage. So I'll talk to you about the partnership on university plagiarism prevention, especially for those who are less familiar with our research project. And then I'll present some of our findings based on the framework that I just showed you. So the partnership on university plagiarism prevention is, the acronym is the PUP. So when we talk about this research project, we call it the PUP. And it's been funded by the Canadian government. So the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. There's 32 universities in Canada, in the United States, and in Europe that are part of the project, and there's also student associations that are with us. There's over 60 scholars from 9 countries, and we operate in the 2 official languages of Canada, so French and English. And the project is 7 years, so as you can see, we're about halfway through the project right now. For those 7 years, the first year was really to submit ethics approval and to develop data collection instruments. And then after that, we had 3 different phases of data collection. One that was a quantitative data collection with questionnaires in 2022, 2023. Last year, we did interviews with professors and we did focus groups with students. And then this year is our last data collection. And we're actually recording live writing tasks on the computer with a screencasting software. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. And then next year, we'll be deep into data analysis, although we have started data analysis already. And then we'll be making recommendations based on those data to design and implement pedagogical material during the last 2 years of the project. And then there's a potential for an extension of an extra year at the end, depending on how our director wants to go about that. So for the next few minutes, I'll talk to you about the findings from our questionnaires and also from individual interviews with professors. I won't be touching on the focus groups with the students, but if you're interested in discussing that, I'm more than happy to do that at the end. So for our phase 1, which was the quantitative data collection with questionnaires, so all of our instruments are bilingual. And we had 1 questionnaire for students and 1 for professors. And as you can see, the questionnaire for students was more extensive. And in our instruments, we also have most of the time 5 different sections. So the first one is just collecting sociodemographic data. The next 3 sections are geared towards what we call digital competencies. So they are searching for information, writing the assignment, and also referencing your sources. So those are the 3 competencies that we're interested in. And then a last section on plagiarism and academic integrity. And again, our project is interested in plagiarism prevention. So our questions are formulated in a constructive manner to see how we can best prevent plagiarism or promote academic integrity. And in the questionnaire, most of the statements were formulated in Likert scales for those who are interested in that. That were 5 points, and it was either our agreement or frequency scales. We had a large volume of respondents that came back. So 6,000 questionnaires filled out, and you've got the distribution between students and professors. We did have to eliminate a number of questionnaires because they were incomplete. But we kept the questionnaires that were complete, where the first section was completed and part of the second section on informational competencies. So I'll show you the distribution from a sociodemographic perspective for students and professors. So for students here, you can see the gender distribution with more female than male, and you'll see that it will be the other way around for professors. So for the language of study here, we had 70% of the respondents that stated that they were studying in their first language, so their mother tongue. And then for years of university, we had 25% of the respondents who were in their first year of university studies, and 84, the number 84 respondents who had been studying at university for over 10 years. And then among all the student surveys, there's 29% that were attending university after an average gap year of 6.2 years. So they had gone to the labor market and then came back, or they were on leave for various reasons, and then they came back to university. For professors, we had the we also had I thought we had more male than female. I think there's a typo here because I don't see 60% of female for professors. So sorry about that. And then, so the respondents were from the same regions. And then for their teaching language, there's 83% of the respondents that stated that they were teaching in their first language. And there's 23% of the respondents who had only accumulated between 1 to 5 years of experience, and 117 respondents who had taught between 30 and 45 years. So very experienced professors. And for the difference in proportion of status, there were 33% of lecturers and 47% of professors. So lecturers in Canada are part-time professors that apply on courses at every term. And out of that, there's only 229 respondents that identify themselves as full professor, or as we would call it in North America, tenure track professors. So I'll show you the results from the questionnaires for 3 different questions. So one question for the students. And you got to remember that these questionnaires were administered only 6 months after ChatGPT came out. So just before we administered the questionnaires, we were able to tweak some of the questions at the last minute so that we added 1 question for students and 2 for professors. And at that time ourselves, we were not overly knowledgeable about all the potential of generative AI after only 6 months of ChatGPT being launched. So here you can see that for students, the majority said that they never or rarely used generative AI. So again, generative AI was very new. Some of the students may not even know what these tools were when they read them on the questionnaire. And as you can see, those are the 3 that we put, but AI Writer hasn't really developed as much as ChatGPT or Quillbot. So it's one of the tools that kind of came out, but felt a bit flat. And if you compare to the graph that I showed you from the American study earlier, definitely it started moving towards the right 1 year after ChatGPT came out. For professors, the questions were, I plan to modify my assignments in order to prevent plagiarism with AI. And as you can see, there's over 50% of them that answered that they were planning to do it. It doesn't mean that they had done it, but they certainly realized that they had to start thinking about it and most likely do it in the near future. So that was promising. And then the second question asked to professors was, I plan to teach my students how to ethically use artificial intelligence. And as you can see, there's a large proportion of undecided professors. And we would explain this result by saying that the professors at that time didn't have a lot of training or knowledge, or the policies of their establishments had not catch up. So they were still very unsure of what they were supposed to do when it comes to teaching their students how to use those tools, also the labor market, and how the tools were used in future jobs. It was still not clear, and even in some domains right now, it's still evolving. So those are for the quantitative data that I wanted to cover this morning. And if we look at qualitative data from the individual interviews that we did with the professors, so again, we had bilingual guides, and then fairly similar number of questions for students and professors with follow-on questions depending on how the interview is going. Again, the five sections with the three competencies being informational, writing, and referencing competencies. Most of the interviews were done in person, and then we did the typical recording and transcription of the audio. And we had some considerations, especially for the students in focus groups, because they see each other while they're being interviewed. We can't really guarantee their anonymity, but we tell them not to share what has been discussed during the group interview outside of the interview. And then we also had compensation for both students and professors to facilitate recruitment. So 238 interviews in total, a fair distribution in the two different languages that we're using, and 130 professors that I'm going to be discussing in more details in the next few slides. But I'll still show you the sociodemographic data also for the students here. Okay, so at the end, we kept 106 interviews for the professors. We had to eliminate some of the interviews that had professors that were teaching at the graduate level, because we're really interested only in the undergraduate levels for our research. There were some forms also missing for some participants so we had to let go of those recordings, but we were left with 106 interviews, about 40 minutes in average. And then you've got similar sociodemographic data then from the questionnaire. And we also asked them if they have ever received academic integrity training, and 44% of the professors had received such a training, be it formal or informal, compared to 46% with students. And I won't go into too much details for the students because I'm going to be focusing more on professors. But for the students, we asked them also if they had done iSchool in public or private schools, which could be an interesting comparable for the dissemination of our results in the future. So I'll be presenting some excerpts from our transcripts in the next few slides based on the four steps of the theoretical framework that I talked about earlier. But Martin and I also discussed a previous step, if you wish, before awareness, that had to do with rejection or avoidance of the new technology by a number of our participants. So I will start with that, and then after that, I'll go into the four different steps. So when we look at those participants that either rejected or avoided generative AI, there were 28% of our participants, so a fairly large proportion, but this was 12 to 18 months after ChatGPT came out. So it's a year after we administered the questionnaires and a little more. So in this case here, you've got a fairly long list of reasons why university professors or staff or faculty will have rejected or avoided generative AI in the 12 to 18 months following the launch of ChatGPT. And although my perspective is to be very open and look at integrating generative AI in my own teaching and the learning of my students, I consider that a lot of these reasons are absolutely legitimate. So there's some students, or sorry, some professors that were still quite overwhelmed with the fast pace of the evolution of generative AI, with new tools coming out every day. It was difficult for them to keep pace. They were also worried about being replaced by machines, or that their students would not necessarily be able to learn what they're supposed to be learning. So an impediment to learning. And then obviously they were concerned about the increase in plagiarism, which is of great interest to us. What was interesting was the fundamental principles or values that some of the professors shared with us in regards to the environmental footprint that generative AI tools are taking to function, and supporting mega corporations that are running these tools, and also data security. And I would say that data security remains a pretty significant concern even at this time, because it hasn't been clarified exactly how the data that is being shared with chatbots, for example, is being used. And I'm not just talking about the text that you're sharing with the chatbots, but also the metadata that is behind the text. So your computer IP address, for example, we're able to locate you when you're exchanging with the chatbots. So there's an excerpt here that is interesting, where one of our participants said that even though he was trying to be positive about this major technological change, the newspapers or the media were really making it scary, talking about being a threat to the education field or domain, or a threat to teachers and learners. So the first stage of the framework is awareness. So here, I mentioned some of these before. So exchanging with close ones, colleagues or students, and then attending training, workshops, conferences, and also just exploring on your own based on your own curiosity, doing trials. And here there's a participant that said that he or she attended a conference, and then the speaker showed them some tools so that they could better understand how the tools work and put them to good use. And they didn't want to look like they didn't know what they were talking about. The personal use stage was not coming out in our data set, just because we didn't really ask a question about that during our interviews. And most of the participants were talking to us about the workplace and what they were doing with those tools based on their professional responsibilities. So I don't necessarily have anything to share with you on the personal use here. The professional use is anything outside of the teaching and learning responsibilities of professors. So here we've got a participant that is talking about using ChatGPT as a search engine to generate lists of references. And I find this very interesting because 12 months and even 18 months after ChatGPT came out, when you were asking the chatbot to provide you with a reference, a lot of the time the reference was made up So that's a little concerning that this participant was using the chatbot to generate list of references. As long as they're double checked, then that's the key. Now the chatbot is this one in particular is a lot more accurate when providing references. But you see a lot of different usage that is was being discussed during our interview. So searching for information and then writing emails, translating with DeepL, for example, and then generating creative titles. I do that myself when I submit manuscripts or articles for publication, and brainstorming as well. That's definitely a strategy that is encouraged in using chatbots for. And then the last one is pedagogical usage. So that's really in your teaching and learning responsibilities. So planning courses and developing learning activities, and then even generating instructions for your assignments and modifying existing assignments and demonstrating to your students how the tools work and what is the potential or the shortfalls. Those are changing quite fast, so you always have to keep up to date on what's going on. And then detecting plagiarism. So that was a little concerning as well that some of the university professors were using generative AI to detect plagiarism, because at this point, most of the tools are not reliable, and they can produce some results that if we base our decisions on those results to accuse students of plagiarism, we may be in the wrong with false positive or false negatives. So you have two different examples here of excerpts from our participants. As you can see, the first one was trying to avoid generative AI in assignments. And the second one here felt that it would be something that is required on the labor market. So they were very open to the students using generative AI in their learning process, as long as they declared it. And I'll get back to the declaration of usage in a second here. So teachers can use generative AI for various reasons, for planning, for designing, and also for evaluation, although there's some caveats in evaluation, especially if you're telling your students not to use ChatGPT, for example, for their assignment, and then you're using it for evaluating. It creates an unfair situation, but you can certainly develop some of your evaluation material. It's when it comes to feedback that the debate is still on for using those tools for evaluation. There's an interesting list of steps that university professors can use when they're looking at their assignments, either previous assignments or future assignments. And this was developed by an Australian team, Lodge and his collaborators. And they called it a taxonomy of 6 options to redesign assessments for generative AI. And I'll just go through it very quickly because I see the time is flying by here. But the first option is to ignore, so to dismiss the new technology, seeing it as just another digital trend that will not have a lasting impact on education. I think we're already past that. The second option is to ban, and so it's to prevent the use of new technology, which is becoming increasingly challenging because AI functions are added even in the most basic word processing software that we're using in Microsoft, for example. So it's not like you're always able to prevent your students from using specific tools, because there's AI functionalities that are integrated into a lot of software or application that are not necessarily AI as a basis. The third option is to invigilate. So that's to design assignments in a way that avoids the use of generative AI. And that could be fine if you're trying to develop like basic or fundamental competencies. So you want your students to be able to understand exactly what they're doing before they start integrating technology. But some of our participants certainly reverted back to more traditional evaluation strategies like writing on a piece of paper in the classroom. And the fourth option is to embrace. So that's to integrate the new technology in assessments by allowing or requiring students to use generative AI in specific tasks. So you can ask the GenAI to produce with generated text, and then they analyze it. And then the fifth option is to design around. So that's to think about assessment that could exploit the limitation of the new technology. And this is a moving part because the limitations get improved quite rapidly. So you always have to update your assignment with the new developments of each of the tools. And then finally, the sixth option is to rethink. And that's by keeping up to date with what's going on in the labor market, and then rethink completely how you're going to be developing your assignments based on what is going to be required of the students in the future in the professions that they want to integrate. And as you can see, we added some roles on the sides here that are based on Rabi's framework that I covered with the different steps. So I think what's important to remember here is that your students declare the usage of GenAI tools when they are producing their assignments, especially written assignments. So I've been using this declaration of academic integrity for almost 2 years now in my courses. And then I ask them to declare that they have done the work themselves. So that's basic academic integrity statement. And then the second one is if they used GenAI, then I want them to tell me what they have used and how they used it. And that's really just to protect them because I don't want to start doubting. I'm sorry. I don't want to start doubt. Sorry about that. Okay. I don't want to start doubting their integrity. So if they're being transparent with what they've done, then that's great. And the second last slide here are logos that Martin developed, and they're inspired by the Creative Commons logos. So your students or yourselves can use these logos on your slides or on your pedagogical material to show if the material was developed without any help from artificial intelligence, with assistance from AI, and also if it was completely generated by AI. So that's one way to be transparent yourself towards your students when you're teaching. So our next step here for the partnership is going to be to record writing tasks. So we've started visiting 2 institutions already, and we're going to complete our data collection in the winter and the spring. And we're going to be recording students and also professors writing a task live on the computer. And we'll see if they're using artificial intelligence tools, and it promises to be quite interesting. And then the last 2 years of the project will be to develop pedagogical material and to disseminate results in various forums. So I'm going to stop here. I've got 10 more minutes for questions or discussion. If you're interested in more information about our project, you can visit our website, and I will stop sharing, and I will put the website in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catherine. We have about 8 minutes for anybody who would like to ask questions and engage in discussion with Catherine. And so if you do, you could just open your microphone or your camera and let us know if you have any questions for Catherine at this point.
Oh, Irene just turned on her camera.
but I don't have a question for you yet. I'll think of one in a minute.
Oh, but you can, yeah, it doesn't have to be a question. It can also be a comment.
Well, I can comment that that was really interesting. That was fascinating. I really enjoyed it, and I like the way you brought together lots of different ideas. I particularly quite like the Bloom's taxonomy and that how that I'd like to have a look at that and read it properly because it's quite a small text.
Yes,
Because I use Bloom a lot. I've used it for
I
years,
know.
years.
Yeah.
It's actually quite nice to see that idea because I can see how that would have been developed and why that would be relevant. So I quite like that idea. So well done for putting all of that together. Interesting results. Only based on a couple of the questions because there are lots more questions, aren't there? But just really interesting results from those few questions that you looked at. So well done.
Yeah. Thank you, Irene. Yeah, the Bloom's taxonomy is quite a foundational theory for education. So I was quite excited when I saw that it had been adjusted or modified or rethought based on GenAI as well.
And it
And
has been also translated to French for those of you who want to see it in French. Nathalie, maybe you can put the Bloom's taxonomy link, French and English, in the chat because we have that close by. Excuse Catherine.
yeah, and like Irene said, we've got quite a large volume of data. So there's lots that is going to come out on our results in the next few years. Bedivel?
Hi, Catherine. Very interesting talk, excellent talk, and lots of work you have done. Just a question. I just It's more about like a query than a talk on what you have already said. So we have talked about Gen AI, how students are using. Is there any, let's say, work going on for use of AI for grading? So we said some professors were concerned about the work, you know, that the artificial intelligence will take over their work. So is there any technology coming up to use for grading apart from the other in the blackboard what we use here we have the short questions answers and multiple like grading of an essay or so forth.
Hang on a second. I'm just pulling a slide here for grading. Here we go. Um, so what's one thing that we fell upon was how to develop a marking rubric. And to make sure that it's efficient when taking into consideration GenAI. So I'll just show you the slide here. So if you're developing your marking rubric, it's important that you think of process, statement, and product. And to do that, one of the best thing is to include a reflection that is metacognitive for your students. So when I develop assignments for my students, the last section of my assignments is often them thinking about what they learned while they did the assignment. And that's really personal. And it's not necessarily something that they can ask ChatGPT or another chatbot to generate for them because it needs to be precise towards the assignment or towards what or in relation to what I taught in the classroom. And the chatbot would not know these things. Um, the assignments should also be linked to the theories or the things that were covered in the course. And then it's interesting if they're declaring what they've used as well. So that's for developing a marking rubric. And then when we talk about marking assignments, which I think it was more the core of your question here, so there is a danger of compromising student confidentiality or security, like I said, with putting assignments, for example, in an AI for the AI to market for you. Because you could do that. You could provide the AI your rubric and then just copy paste or just attach the assignments inside the AI and the AI would mark it for you. But there's an issue with security when you do that. And you also get to remember that AIs are continuing their training with our usage. So are you feeding information that may be inaccurate because not all the students produce stellar assignments? So you may feeding the AI with inaccurate information. What is that going to do to the training of the tool itself? And then the lack of fairness, I mentioned it a bit earlier. Depending what you allow your students to do, you should do the same thing. You shouldn't be using more tools for more things than what you're permitting your students to do, because that creates an unfair situation. And there's you got to remember what exactly you're aiming at with your corrections. Is it really a gain for you to use those tools to mark your assignments? And I personally want to provide personalized feedback to my students, and by using a tool, that may not happen.
Could I have another question or another comment? I was interested in Martin's definition of how you've changed the definition of plagiarism. And what we decided to do within the European network is not to is to consider AI misuse as separate from plagiarism, rather than to conflate the two things, because we felt it was different and clearer if it was separated out. And I could see the argument why you might want to bring them together for simplicity. But there are, we felt it was better to leave it separate from plagiarism and define it differently. And also I did that within my own university regulations. So actually I separated out the different types of use of AI. For example, translation is mentioned specifically, and so is translation tools and translation tools, but also translation by another person could be a form of, whether it's a tool or a person, it actually wouldn't matter if they're doing it to pretend they've written in the target language and they haven't. Then I think it's important that is seen as a form of misconduct. So I was just wondering what your logic was behind, and perhaps this is one for Martin rather than for Catherine, what your logic was behind that expanded definition where you incorporate AI behind that.
Before we had essay mills, and essay mills, using an essay mill was considered plagiarism. And so if you consider that essay mills is having somebody else write your text or your assignment, then using AI to write your assignment would be the same. And that's why we decided to I decided to incorporate it into plagiarism. I think
and if I can just, sorry to interrupt, but we didn't do that. So we didn't equate use of essay mills as plagiarism. We didn't call it that. We called it something different because plagiarism can be accidental, whereas using an essay mill is definitely not accidental. No. But therefore, we didn't do that conflation with plagiarism.
But using an AI at this time can still be accidental plagiarism, because some of the students don't realize there's an AI driving certain applications or certain websites. And so in here, whenever somebody else wrote, and if you passed somebody else's paper as your own, it was considered plagiarism. And so we just kept it as the definition that we had beforehand. I agree, it could be considered misconduct, but either way, for here, plagiarism includes cheating on exams, and it includes a whole bunch of things, and that's why we just bunched it in with everything else because it's dealt with it's dealt by the same committee with the same sanctions, and so we just lumped it in at this point. It's 11:02. I think we will thank Catherine very, very much. It was a very interesting talk. And for those of you who have any more comments or questions for Catherine, you can certainly email her. Catherine, maybe you want to put your email in the chat. And I thank you very much, everybody, for being here today. And if you have any questions on the PUP, please don't hesitate to email the 5 people that are here that are PUP members. Thank you very much.